experiencing now with the pandemic has really put this in the spotlight, when the right and wrong is not uniform across organizations, but each organization has always been thrown into the deep end of trying to work out what's the right and wrong is for them, because there isn't really an answer, and there is only so much you can do from a legal point of view. So you really have to question what your values are as an organization with respect to people. And so I guess when I look, if I think about, imagine myself 5 years from now, and I think what would we, I hope, as a society taken away from this pandemic into the future of work. I definitely don't think about the pajamas, although that's quite appealing. But what I think about is whether we can grasp onto the ideas of the power and inequalities that the current environment has an opportunity to exacerbate, but also has an opportunity to really help us address. And the way we've been thinking about it at NESTA, which is kind of an innovation foundation, so we think about future work from the innovation point of view, is with respect to the levelling up agenda. So for a while, the government has been pursuing this idea that we must, kind of at a national level, tackle the inequalities that exist between cities and the left behind areas of the UK. So the problem with the kind of the innovation policy that has been pursued is that the kind of good jobs, so the highly paid jobs, the jobs that are in tech, the exciting jobs in finance and tech, are concentrated in pockets of the UK, and they're primarily in cities. And then they drag with them the infrastructure around the city, because if the jobs are highly paid, then you have the school system that are better, the healthcare system that are better. So everything is, the access to most infrastructure and facilities is better in cities, because that's where the highly paid jobs are concentrated. And then the gap between those areas and the rest of the UK widens. And so there's been obviously lots of thinking about how can we tackle this and how can we stimulate job creation in other parts of the UK, and HS2 is there, and with a lot. And of course now we have this amazing opportunity where people suddenly realize they don't have to be in cities to deliver work that perhaps is provided by city-based firms. And so there is a huge potential there to kind of shift the power and inequality that people experience in terms of their opportunities and access to work across the UK. But going back to my question in terms of who's responsible and who determines what's right and what's wrong, I only see very few examples of the different kind of stakeholders in this environment taking responsibility and really grasping that as an opportunity. So when I think about the kind of the different agents, if you like, in that system, we don't see much from the policymakers apart from the immediate, short-term response to the crisis. And although there is talk about the levelling up agenda, it doesn't really translate into what does this mean. So a few local authorities have been thinking about how they can use this context to attract different kind of workers into their regions, but it's not kind of a national issue or a national program, if you like. Then of course we have employers, and this is where I hope that all of you are thinking about it, and great that you are, about how employers can think differently about how they construct office space and how they think about work. And again, with flexible working, it's kind of easy to fall into the thinking around kind of smarter working, flexible working, the productivity gains of it. But there is, of course, the equality and fairness aspect, and an opportunity to create, better well-being for people, and for them to feel like they have more options in terms of how they work and where they work from. And I think some of the things that Liza, you referred to, and perhaps Zoe as well, around managers that haven't thought about this before are now realizing that work is not just a place, but it has meaning to people. And there is a lever that employers have in terms of creating an experience at work, as opposed to just providing a desk and an office space for someone to work in. And so I guess I'm curious to see how more employers respond to it and see some good examples of it. So one I've kind of spotted so far is Pret, who quite early on started thinking about, completely completely changing their business model, because quite early on they said we'll just accept that the workplace won't go back to normal. And so they're thinking about how they can create local branches and do a slightly different model of working where they're not, again, so concentrated in high streets and cities. And then lastly, I guess, with my idea of power and equality, what I really love about the current context, and definitely experienced that as an employer ourselves, although by no means we were fantastic in responding to it immediately, is the way that staff themselves, the people, realize their power and start using their voice to just tell us how they feel about this and what they want to do. Of course, theoretically, we all know that's part of good employment and good work, that people have voice about, what they want to do and how they want to work. But now it's like loud and clear, and it's not negotiable. People just vote with their feet. They just say, well, I don't want to come to the office, so what are you going to do about it? And I have proven to you that I'm perfectly productive and fine working from home. So the power balance is definitely shifting. And so again, I'm really curious how employers and HR in particular responds to that challenge, and what can we make of it, and how can we think about not just kind of responding to the requests for different types of working, but how do we reimagine the role of people's voice in running organizations more broadly. So I guess just lastly to say, I've focused on the positive sides of it, and I'm really excited about all these changes in power dynamics. I'm probably excited it from more like a scientific perspective. I'm a researcher, so I'm really interested in what comes out of it. But I also think it's probably worth just acknowledging that there will be not just winners, but also the losers of this situation, because there will be lots of types of occupations that won't be able to switch to this different kind of working. But nevertheless will want the same access to power and voice and being able to decide what happens to their future work. And so I guess the last challenge to employees and to HR is how to respond and how to interact with these different types of circumstances, the different types of work, whilst giving people equal opportunity to participate in shaping the future work for themselves. Lots of questions, not a lot of answers. I hope that was the brief.
Well, I think it's probably inevitable, quite frankly, but I don't know, you've got some answers there as well. I mean, this point about the people are really realizing their power and finding their voice, that's a great observation actually about how and where they work. It's genie out of the bottle stuff, but in a good way. No, I think that's excellent. Thanks, Ksenia. And your point about the workplace as well, and how that's shifting. The city's dragging the infrastructure and the jobs with them, but suddenly people don't have to be in cities to work. I mean, that's as anyone who's been into London recently, it's quite striking. Thanks, Ksenia. That's great. Amy.
Yeah, thank you. And there might be a little bit of echoes here again, because I think we're all grappling with similar issues. I think one of the things that's really struck me actually when we talked about the future of work is it's impossible not to take the here and now into account as we're doing that. And I think the here and now both influences what the future of work looks like, but I think also demonstrates just how unpredictable the future is. Nobody anticipated that we would be dealing with the situation that we are. So I think, we can spend a lot of time thinking about the future, but I think perhaps we have to identify what are the indicators and what are the symbols that we can spot now. And I think that, again, there are a couple of trends that I think we've all identified. For me, the two that I'm particularly sort of curious about currently, although this seems to change on a day-to-day basis, is the role that business plays in society. So similar to what Ksenia said around responsibility, but businesses are having to play a very different role in society than perhaps a couple of decades ago. The other one is around the risk of an increasing divergence of opportunity. So in terms of the role that business plays, I think government legislation has for a while been pushing more and more responsibility onto employers, but also customers and employees have a very different view of what businesses should be doing, how they should be behaving, what they stand for. And people are making very distinct choices based on that now in a way that perhaps historically we didn't. We expect businesses to stand for more than just making money. And thankfully we do hear, there is a movement of hearing about businesses putting people and planet alongside profit, and doing well by doing good. And increasingly we expect businesses to have an opinion and voice an opinion on societal issues such as Black Lives Matter, for example. That's obviously been very front of mind for a lot of people recently. And that flags for me then that this isn't without risk. A business that it goes out there and states an opinion on some of these issues runs the risk of turning people away from them, particularly if it's inauthentic. But actually the upside, the positive, is that it can engender great loyalty and advocacy, and actually can give you a competitive advantage, can create that distinctive brand externally. The other thing around the risk of the divergence of opportunity, we've touched on it a lot around obviously the accelerating trend of remote working, and that opens up a much bigger talent pool. We've touched on, you know, the fact that you don't have to be in one location anymore. So not only does that give us as an organisation a greater pool from which to fish, in theory it also gives talent much more choice around where they choose to work. But I am a little bit concerned about whether this is a level playing field, and actually whether what's happening is the gap is widening between the haves and the have-nots. And there are three ways in particular that are sort of striking me at the moment that you know, I'm hearing through the news. The first is around the future implications as a result of a widening education gap because of homeschooling. So what is this storing up for us in years to come? There's some research that suggests that the pandemic has at least reversed the last decade's worth of work on closing that education gap. The other is around the impact on employment and longer term earning potential of school leavers and graduates. You know, we know from previous economic downturns that that particular population are never able to recover their earning potential. So, you know, what are we storing up, and what are we doing to those individuals throughout their working lives in the future? And then the third one, which perhaps we've heard more clearly and might be more resonant for a number of us, is the increasing gender inequality because of the additional work home responsibilities that typically are falling to women. I think it was something like 15 hours per week of unpaid, I like this phrase, domestic labour. But you know, I think we perhaps many of us can understand that experience. And you know, during this pandemic, apparently another study said that 47% of women have permanently lost or quit their roles. 47% of women are more likely to have. They're also 14% more likely to have been furloughed. And we talked a lot about remote working, but only 1 in 10 lower earners are roles that are able to be performed from home, and 69% of those lower earning roles are performed by women. So again, what is the impact, the longer term impact of this gap? So I think back to my first point, nobody can predict the future, but I think what I feel positive about is that there are some indicators now already at this point in time of what some of the risks might be around some of this short-term impact on a long-term future. So let's make sure that we are actually responding to some of those indicators today, so that we're having a positive influence on what the future of work looks like.
Excellent. That's some powerful points there about gender and the inequalities as well. That education gap that's a decade's work undone in 6 months.
Yeah, there was another stat around Black Caribbean students up to GCSEs were about 6.5 months behind their white peers, and now already through COVID they believe that's up to 10.9 months behind. So I mean, that's very specific, but it was quite stark for me when you see it in terms of, I mean, it's added another 4 months of a gap in a relatively short space of time.
Yeah, but it is. No, you're right. It is a short space of time, isn't it? Especially when all the work's been put into it as well. And 1 in 10 low earners can work from home, which, in one hand, isn't a surprise in some ways, but in other ways, is very startling. And you know, yeah, powerful stuff. Okay, that's really useful. Thank you. Oh, I wanted to ask you, is there one brand that you think has come out of the pandemic well that you've particularly seen good work? You know, your point about authenticity and a distinctive brand.
Well, there is, but I'm a bit biased because I'm doing a bit of work with it. But I'm really close to. It has been verified externally. Well, in as much as, so I'm doing some work with Sage, not the government advisory body, the accountancy software company, and actually their CEO has been awarded or recognised as the sort of the top UK CEO for kind of response to the pandemic as a result of Glassdoor reviews. And I think that actually is down to, and we've heard this already, down to amazing leadership, a lot of visibility, a lot of openness about, hey, we just don't know, we don't know what the future is going to hold. Really listening to their people. They have had an always listening approach throughout the entirety of lockdown and obviously since then, and they're constantly responding to that and iterating how they're approaching things. And I think so that shift of power, as Ksenia talked about, I don't know that it's necessarily been positioned like that, but there's a real sense of having a voice and being listened to, and seeing the results of that two-way dialogue. So I put my hands up. There's a bit of bias there because I'm closer to them, but I think it's been truly impressive, as opposed to a bit of a pat on the back and a bit self-congratulatory. It's genuinely deserved, I think.
Well, and you've obviously, on the other hand, you've seen it from the inside, so you've seen that, you could, it's always quite telling, isn't it? Sometimes it's a very different picture, but obviously in this case not. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Abby. And Zoe was just asking for the references you were citing there. So after the call, I'll do a real research, or you and I can swap notes on that, and we'll put it on the slide deck for afterwards. Thanks. Seetal, thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'm Seetal Bhatti. I'm HR Director for Service Delivery in Openreach, and I wanted to share some of my reflections on, I guess, this whole topic of future of work, both internally and what I've observed externally over the last few years, but also then sort of zeroing in on what I think is one of the most critical issues, which is around leadership skills that will help us navigate through that. And I think it's both kind of leadership in the general sense, but also I think it's HR leadership skills as well. So I was reflecting on my interactions, whether it be events like this, or conferences, or articles that I've read on future of work for over the last few years. And it's a conversation that's been going on for way before I've been involved in it. And it made me smile because, I think the debates have been quite expansive, but they've tended to focus on sort of three major areas of shift. So one being about the kind of technological advancements and the extent to which AI, big data, robotics will dramatically eliminate all of the jobs that exist in the economy today and replace them with entirely new ones for which we'll need a completely different skill set. And then there's the whole piece around societal preferences and how that shapes the products and services that we demand, and therefore kind of the workforce skills that are needed to create that. And then there's the labour market itself, so there's sort of massive shift away from kind of traditional models of full-time employment towards the gig economy. And that's been, what's dominated the conversation around the future of work and all of the different elements that kind of sprawl out of that. And they interact and influence each other. And what made me smile about it was that almost every conversation that I've been part of up until now has painted a slightly dystopian future as a result of all of these things coming together. And then there's a sort of collective sigh of relief when they say, but don't worry, because we've been predicting this for ages and it hasn't happened yet. So you can all sort of rest assured that actually, as much as we're drivers of change as humans, we're also quite resistive to change, because we don't want to dismantle our culture or the systems and structures that we know how to work within. And so at that point, everyone does genuinely breathe a sigh of relief. You go, yeah, okay, it is going to come, but I've got time to prepare for it. It's going to be fine. And then COVID happened, and we got shunted right into that future very, very quickly and quite dramatically. And as well as seeing some of the benefits of that future, I think we are now facing into quite a large range of ills that actually, if we don't grapple with quite quickly and we don't have strong leadership to support us and that help us navigate through that, I'm quite worried about the impacts on organisations, on society, on the economy. And yet I'm also quite hopeful, because I do see some great examples of it even within my own organisation. So when I think about our own organisation, so BT and Openreach, where the part of BT that I work in, we're responsible for communication networks across the UK, across the globe, not every country, but a great deal of them. And we've been right at the heart, I guess, of we are right at the heart, I guess, of the technology aspect of the shift. So we need to be either leading it or closely following the leaders in terms of creating products and services that people will want in the future. And in order to do that, we have to radically modernise our organisation. So we're over 100 years old as an organisation. We have kind of a set of union arrangements that are incredibly archaic and really hold us back as an organisation from changing quickly. We have an average tenure in my part of the business that I think might be close to my own age, and so getting people to shift behaviours or thinking can be quite a challenge. And all of that we need to respect. Actually, that's part of our legacy. It's part of our culture. It's part of our history. But at the same time, in order to make sure that we can be sustainable as a business and we can serve our purpose in keeping the UK connected, which I think more people have appreciated in recent years, we need to adapt. And the skills that we're going to need in the future are definitely shifting towards more of kind of agile, digital, data science, and away from some of the traditional skills that we have. And so we're investing quite heavily in learning infrastructure and how we deploy that to our people to help them re-skill and retrain. But we have to accept that we're going to lose quite a lot of people along the way, and we just need to make sure that we do that responsibly. Since COVID, I think there's been a few things actually that have really come to the fore for me that I've been thinking about. So those are kind of they sort of play into the leadership skills then. So one which is about being agile in your mindset, and really being able to let go of what you believed, unlearn, and then relearn, redesign quickly, because our demand for our services is changing in a way that we never would have predicted. The future is very unpredictable for us and very volatile. So what we thought we were going to be doing this year, I keep having finance telling me about the plan, the budget. I'm like, I don't care about the budget. I don't care about the plan, because that plan was set way before COVID happened. We really need to reimagine this, and people's ability to adapt quickly to the new environment is going to be incredibly important. I also think that we need to pay attention to mental health in a way that we never have done before in our organisation, and a lot of others have really struggled with. So we know it's an issue. It's not necessarily coming through in our reporting, but we just have to act on instinct. And we're starting to see that as people are more fearful than ever about security of their roles. Leadership maturity, so having greater empathy, I think is really important. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of heightened sensitivity to any change in work at the moment, right? Because is this the thin end of the wedge? Is this the bit where you take this activity away from me and all of a sudden I don't have a job? And people are much more sensitive to that than I've seen in any kind of restructuring exercise I've been in before, or even any downturn that I've been in before. And then I would say diversity and inclusion. So at the start of COVID, actually, I was talking to a lot of my friends who are D&I practitioners, and they were sort of really worried that there would be a massive setback on that agenda, because COVID would put the focus on other things. And actually, with the tragic death of George Floyd and then the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's actually been quite the opposite. So I think we have a real opportunity as both HR practitioners and leaders to make sure that diversity and inclusion stays really firmly embedded in the conversation about the future of work. Because I don't think it's going anywhere quickly, and we just need to make sure that we integrate it in the way that we think.
Excellent. Thank you. That's a really nice, that's a good list there. Agile in your mindset. I like the unlearn and relearn and redesign, mental health, and the heightened sensitivity you're seeing to any change. And God knows there's been a lot of that in the last 6 months. And then the keeping it embedded, as you're saying, and in the way that that we as HR leaders want to see that conversation progress. Because as you say, there's a real opportunity there too. That's great. Thanks ever so much, Seetal. What we're going to do is now is if everyone can feed in on chat their points for around about 10 minutes or so before we go into a breakout room. We would just have a bit of a panel discussion. I think we've got about 8 questions. I don't think we're going to get through those. So I'm going to pick out 1 or 2 because some of them speak to what network members were saying right at the top of this conversation. And so I have people I'm going to sort of point this question towards, but panel, please do feel free to come in at any point, because I think you've all got you all have points to share. So the one I wanted to start with actually, which we hadn't actually got allocated to anyone, was will we finally see a sea change in leadership styles? More empathy, even a more personal relationship between employer and employee. So the question here, I guess, is it going to stick? Because that's really where we started with network members were saying they've seen leaders change quite radically. Others start to revert. It's a real mix, it seems to me. Amy, perhaps I can start with you. Do you think it's going to have a genuine change in the affecting them in the long term or medium term even?
Well, again, nobody knows. I hope so. Is the short answer, and I think the point has already been made. I think those that are already doing it well will probably continue to excel, and those that are struggling less so. But I think one of the things I've been really struck by with and again we've sort of alluded to this, but about the sort of leadership during this time is this humanizing kind of opportunity that we've had as a result of literally windows into people's homes, and even our C-suite, most of the time you're still seeing the life that is happening behind them, with children coming in, and you're just getting this different kind of snapshot. So I think whilst it might not necessarily be improving the leadership empathy, I'm hoping that it is becoming a bit of a leveler, actually, and it is just reminding everybody that we're at the end of the day, we are all human, irrespective of what level of seniority you have in a business. So I don't think you can unsee that, and I think if it creates a different dynamic, I think it's going to be hard when you go back into the office, if indeed people do go back into the office, to undo that. But what I'm curious about is the interim, when you've got some people who go back in and some people who stay at home, and whether that perceived sense of accessibility to leadership and certainly at a senior level, whether there then becomes an inequality as a result of that, whether people are prepared to go into the office or not. So sorry, I've just asked another question, but
it's that type of debate, I think, to be fair. Ksenia, Seetal, I'd be interested in your views. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, I'm quite interested. So I've myself done work on leadership before, and I think it's a really interesting question around whether we will see more empathy. I agree with Amy, we probably will, but I guess what I wanted to add, it doesn't mean life will be any easier for leaders. So empathy, from the research that I could have done, works on very much on an individual level. So you empathize with someone, kind of someone's personal circumstances or their personal condition, and you have this, tremendous drive to respond to this and to help. But what the trouble is, if you have 300 of those people or 10,000 of those people, then their individual circumstances might be very different. And then the leadership challenge is, how do you empathize with everyone? And how do you, when you're driven to help all of those people on the individual level, how do you then lead the collective of the organization, where inevitably you have to have trade-offs in terms of the individual outcomes. So kind of negotiating that individual and collective in the context where you feel so much more empathy with individual circumstances, I think it's going to be quite a challenge.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Seetal, what do you think?
Yeah, so the thing I've been reflecting on with this is leadership in times of high stress. So this is the second organisation that I've been in where it was highly stressful, and you really see people's leadership styles exaggerated in those times, right? Or some of the dark sides, as they're often called, start to come out. So those who had a tendency towards empathy or positive kind of leadership traits of leading an organisation of people through stress, I think thrive in these environments. And then you see some of the negative ones coming through even more strongly as well. But what I do think tends to happen over time, depending on how long the stress period lasts, is that most leaders they gain experience, right? So they gain experience, and with that experience comes wisdom. And the next time they're in a high stress environment, I think they tend to act with more empathy, or with a better set of skills. Whether or not we see a massive dial-up of empathy in the here and now, I'm dubious about that. I think you're just going to see an exaggeration of what's already there.
Okay, yeah, well, that makes sense. Do you think that conversely, though, there is less hiding place for poor leaders? I mean, it's as Amy was saying, you're not literally in the C-suite. It should be less transparent. On the other hand, because as you were saying, Seetal, it's leadership styles are exaggerated. Is there less of a hiding place for managers who can't connect, and as Zoe said, who can't sort of develop that relationship with individuals?
Possibly. But I think that because we're all remote, it can be hidden. So, you know, unless you've got really good systems of being able to understand the impact of management style on individuals in a remote workforce, it can be hidden more, I think, than when you're all together in the office and you can see someone's not coping.
Yeah.
I wonder though, with Ksenia's point actually around the shift of power, whether employees are feeling a bit more emboldened, and actually whether they're more likely to call this out now, because it's also because the conversation around things like mental health are vastly different now to how they were, you know, even a year ago. And so I'm wondering if actually there's a greater degree of courage of employees to actually flag when there are issues around leadership and management style. I mean, again, it's a question, but there is a definite shift in dynamic, it feels.
Sorry.
Someone go off.
No, I was just going to say, I've definitely noticed that through our online platform. So we use Workplace, which is the Facebook platform. We introduced it about a year ago. And a number of our leaders are very transparent and very visible through that. And, you know, they take a lot of abuse from people as well, right? So people are very honest and direct with them about what they like and what they don't like. And I think that's good. I think it's really healthy. Sometimes it kind of gets a little bit uncomfortable and unhealthy, but we don't sort of, you know, unless something's deeply offensive, we don't remove comments, we don't take it down, we let it self-regulate. So I do think, again, depending on what sort of technology or what systems you have to access that kind of voice and to showcase it, I think there is definitely an opportunity for more courage for people to be sharing their true opinions.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, I'm with you. And that's the other one I was going to ask, which Amy had touched on already, is would anything change to make work genuinely more flexible? For instance, for women particularly, recent stats suggest, as Amy I think said, women still picked up more domestic tasks during lockdown, whether they were in paid employment or not. So is there a sense where it seems as if we're working more flexibly because we've got remote and online, but actually the substance behind that doesn't necessarily back it up? And what might change?
I'm quite happy to jump in, sorry, but I don't want to dominate. This is a really interesting one for me, is whether this sort of, you know, whether this remote working, or as what, you know, which is what a lot of people perceive as being flexible working, it is actually giving us greater equality, because I think the signals are not looking particularly positive. And I think what it shows is that the inequality is not necessarily about flexibility. It's about, again, I think it's about gender stereotypes. I think it's about mindsets and what society still expects. So it's interesting, because for years people, you know, been saying, oh, well, if we had more flexible working, it will resolve all of our gender inequality issues. And I think it's clear that it's not. I think, again, for me, I'm a big advocate of design thinking. So that the two things that really I love about that are the sort of experimenting, that, you know, that kind of test and learn mindset, but also this point around putting yourself in the shoes of your end user. So in our case, it's our employees. So what can we do to truly understand? And Ksenia made the very, you know, great challenge around, you know, everybody is an individual. So how can you strike the balance between the individual and the collective? And sadly, I don't necessarily have the answer to that. But I think that, again, if you take a test and learn approach to this, maybe there is an opportunity for us to strike the right balance of what flexibility actually means for each individual, and use that to address some of the challenges that we've seen historically around equality.
Okay.
We've spoken about, kind of in preparation for this call, about kind of who's in the room when decisions are made. If all decisions had to be made on an individual level, that's quite hard. But if we're thinking about how, as an organization, do we, you know, respond to this challenge around the flexible working, and those who are designing that are not just those who are available and probably not doing childcare, then that discussion will be more inclusive, and by definition, hopefully, will address more individual concern as well. But like you, I'm not sure I have the answer about the balance.
It's a really interesting point, because I'm in the middle of designing a new engineering role, and part of our brief has been to design it with women in mind. And everybody has an opinion of what a woman wants and needs, including women themselves. And my observation is that everybody thinks women, the collective, want something wildly different, and not much of it is research based. So I do think that design thinking is absolutely the key, right? And making sure that you're doing a quality job of really understanding what the needs of your target audience are, in this case women, for this role. But around the point of you know, the balance of responsibilities and how society views that, I mean, it's very anecdotal, right? This is just based on lots of conversations I've been having with family and friends, and also observations of the school run, right? So many more men on the school run now than I've ever seen before, and that's really heartening. And so many more of my male friends actually just deeply appreciative of the lack of a commute and the ability to spend more time at home with their families. Now, that might not yet be extending to them picking up domestic duties, but I'm hopeful that actually this sort of collective experience that we're having of all being forced to work from home might lead to more awareness, and therefore hopefully to more kind of sharing of those responsibilities over time. But that's just a hope rather than based on any evidence.
No, I think that's a lovely way of viewing it, actually, and I think there's a place for optimism in all of this, isn't there? And actually, there are a few of my colleagues doing some of the consulting work that I'm doing at the moment who are blocking out time in their diaries and specifying what it is that they're doing, that they are shouldering some of the childcare responsibilities. So yeah, I think your optimism is well placed in certain areas. So let's hope that continues.
Fingers crossed.
I think the point about involving end users is really key. I mean, I have to admit having a vested interest here, but I'm a single parent. So in lockdown, being a single parent with 2 teenagers, so they were able to sort themselves out to a degree. But I just sort of put myself back about 5 years and think, God, if I'd been dealing with 2 children on my own at home and trying to hold down a full-time job, it would have been a nightmare. So you're right, this whole concept of working from home being much better for women, I'm not convinced is true.
Yeah, fair enough. And I also take your point, they can look after themselves to a degree. I don't want to... I've got 2 teenagers. I know what you're saying. Okay, that's left us with a lot of things to discuss. So I'm going to pause it there. Thank you, speakers, very much. There's lots to explore, and I think we need time to reflect in the breakout room. So we're going to put you into the breakout room now. And forgive me if I just move people around a bit. So for instance, if all the 3 speakers end up in a breakout room together, that's it's not going to work. So there might be a bit of moving around briefly, and we'll have until 11 o'clock. And the question I'm going to propose to you is, what do you think HR / your organisation should be doing now to prepare for the future of work? So what do you think HR or your organisation should be doing now to prepare for the future of work? And as we always say on these, you can choose to ignore that if you wish, because the discussion may take you off elsewhere, and that's absolutely fine. This is very much a blank page thing anyway. So yeah, what are you going to be doing now, or should be doing now to prepare for the future of work? We'll have until 11 o'clock, then we'll get back in the round, hear your thoughts, challenges, other solutions as well. So bear with me a sec, and I'm going to just